Pewdiepie relies on fan support from people like you. If you enjoy my stories and have the generosity to do so, please consider supporting me monthly on Patreon. Alternatively, you can tip me on coffee for a single tip. You would really help me and the channel out, since we all know bills need to be paid. Thank you for your consideration. Also, please remember to like the video, comment and share the video around, as that improves my standing in the YouTube algorithm. And now, please, enjoy the show. University sucked. Your entire life you just wanted to become a programmer. Your brain was filled with ideas you desperately wanted to turn into video games. To support this, you took programming classes and also some art classes and photography, the latter mostly as a hobby. Something you later dropped to replace it with literature, in the hopes it would help you with your primary goal. Sadly though, you quickly realized that the professors were more interested in their personal politics rather than actually teach you something useful. This not only led to you rolling your eyes constantly, but also doubled your load of learning in your private time. Sadly though, to help pay your tuition fees, you also needed a job. You were employed at the Fazbear Entertainment Megaplex as the night guard. Your work was not that intrusive on your studying. All you needed to do was check the cameras every once in a while and remember to go on patrol every 60 to 30 minutes. Your shift just started, so the day shift people were still present. The janitor, day shift cut Brian, and receptionist Charlotte, and of course, on-duty engineer Kevin, whose job today had been switching the endoskeletons from the machines back into their original shells, as they had been purposefully put into the wrong ones for April Fool's Day last week. So, it was a little more lively in the employee lounge than usual. You had brought your backpack with books and papers and stored it under the table. And as you chatted away with the others, something kicked your back from under the table. Gulping, you looked around the room. No one so far had been the wiser of your nightly cram sessions, meaning you didn't know if you were allowed to. So someone kicking your back could hint at something. Charlotte and the janitor were completely lost in their chit-chat. Kevin sat next to you and savored his raspberry fizzy fizz. It was the last can of the extremely sugary drink, at least for a while, as raspberry fizzy fizz was only sold during special occasions that weren't related to any religious holiday. So for example, both Father's and Mother's Day, April Fools, the end of World War II, etc. The engineer loved the drink and probably had already spent half his salary for this month just buying gallons of it to bring home. So since the overweight engineer was busy with his luxury soda that only left, your eyes darted to Brian. The brim of his security cap hung so low you could only see his mouth and lower jaw, a smug smile decorating his lips. And after a second kick, you were sure it was him. You could tell by his slight body movements. What was his game here? Kevin then unleashed a mighty belch suddenly, and for a moment, all attention was on him. Sorry. Silence. You know, Kev, if you share some of that, I can show you a real one. That was Brian. Oh God, why were these two such dorks? Charlotte sighed and stood up, leaving with an expression of both disgust and annoyance. So did the janitor. Leaving you with the two men. Kevin grinned. Night guard, would you like to be our judge? You blinked. The judge of what? Who's the bigger pig, of course? answered Brian with an amused hum. You looked at both of them. Brian was a pothead. Lazy, smug, and somewhat simple-minded. Yet also mysterious, as he barely spoke about his private life. Kevin, meanwhile, was an overweight family man with a receding hairline, a pig nose, and a heart of gold. He also had an incredible talent for repairing fine machinery, like the animatronics. I think you two are quite equal on the pig front. The two men looked at each other before grinning proudly. Well, I guess next time, said Kevin, and chuckled. He stood up, grabbed the rest of his soda, and waddled out. Can gently pressed against his lips as he chugged. Now you were alone with the enigmatic Brian. So, how's studying? He said as soon Kevin was out of the room. Since when do you know? He said defensively. Cameras, you idiot. Of course, the one thing you forgot. You do know I'm supposed to report that to the manager, right? You narrowed your eyes. What's your game here, pothead? He smirked and then shrugged. I want to help. You snorted. Yeah, how? Do you even know what I need to know? He shrugged again. I know you're doing something with literature. You blinked and then blushed. Are you stalking me? He deadpanned. No. Not only did you forget the cameras, you also forgot to wipe your browser history on your work tablet. You know, the type of tablet every worker gets and that the security guards and management have remote access to check if any employee misuses work equipment. Oh boy, I remember the shitstorm that was waiting for me when Amir found out I had Plants vs. Zombies on my tablet. You sighed. How are you going to help me? He shrugged. Tomorrow I'm not on shift. You can come crash at my place. And when you wake up, we learn together. A cram session, if you will. And don't worry. He winked. A crash course in human biology is optional and free of charge. You blushed slightly at the flirtatious offer. You just want to see me naked. Brian leaned back in his chair. Well, only if it's on your own accord. I ain't forcing anybody. I told you. Optional. I won't expect it. But I just, want to put the offer on the table. You growled. I'll be waiting for you in the morning when the switch happens. Oh, and by the way, tomorrow it's Terminator, so you gotta watch out. Terminator, of course, was not the person's real name. He was the replacement security guard. A military vet, walking behemoth that did everything by the books. He was the real reason you were afraid of studying at work. Thankfully, Terminator was only a part-time employee, only actually working when either of you had a few days off. Fine, you sighed after a moment of thought. You watched as Brian got on his feet and slumped out of the room without even saying goodbye. And finally, your shift could officially begin. Nothing really happened, as expected. You pulled out your books at around 3 a.m. and sat down in a quiet office next to the arcade prize counter and began studying. As the hours passed, you couldn't help but be bored. The more you read, the blurrier the text became, and the thought that maybe you should shave off half of your hair, color it blue, and get a nose ring just to get on your professor's good side became an idea worth pursuing. And soon the clock hit 6 a.m. Tired, you put your books away and returned to the employee lounge next to the lobby. The morning shift janitor was already there, enjoying a coffee. With only minor interest, they asked the obligatory, "Did anything happen during your shift?" Which you of course retorted with a no. But then they said something you didn't see coming. "By the way, I saw this car in the parking lot. Brian was standing next to it. Do you think it's his? It looks pretty expensive." And your interest was awoken. 20 minutes later, you clocked out and left the building. The parking lot was mostly empty, save for maybe 3 or 4 cars of guests who came for the early morning menu. And there, at the end of the lot, stood a beautiful BMW. Matte black SUV. Next to it leaned Brian, of all people. This time in what you would call civilian clothes, considering you had never seen him out of his purple day shift uniform. On top his long black hair sat a black beanie with the words "Born to Live" printed on them in white text. He wore a simple white t-shirt with a few stains on it, black sweatpants that were at least 2 sizes too big, and sandals. You raised an eyebrow, not expecting to see such well-maintained toenails. Was he secretly a hygiene freak? In his mouth, of course, was a lit reefer. Brian's green eyes focused on you as you approached, and he smirked. Impressed? Surprised? Just trying to figure out what you're thinking. You looked at the car. You didn't understand much of vehicles, saw outside of it looking a bit futuristic. You couldn't comment on it. I'd say surprised. Surprised you even showed up. He took a drag of his joint and blew the smoke up in the air. You better believe it. Let me guess. That thing there behind you? Daddy's money? You could never afford something this pretty on your security guard salary. Unless you figured out a secret. Well, you are blackmailing our mirror. He shrugged. I hit the nail on the head. With Daddy's money. Come on. He waved you inside. Normally you wouldn't do this. Brian was your co-worker and technically nothing more than an acquaintance. However, knowing how serious he took his job, he could definitely not risk it by doing something to you, right? You gulped internally. Or would he? You threw your bag into the back of his car, and then sat down in the passenger seat. He rolled down the driver's side window and let his arm hang out. You look uncomfortable. You glanced to the side where your second-hand car stood. Technically, you could still decline his offer. But then... What the... Something was happening under your seat. It quickly became incredibly hot. With a grin, Brian looked away. What is this? You shouted. Seat heater. Your lips quivered. Please turn it off. He shrugged. It was the middle of summer. He most definitely did that to fuck with you. Probably as revenge for making you wait in the heat while you chatted with the janitor. After a light chuckle, Brian leaned forward and turned down a dial. And while your seat didn't immediately cool off, it definitely didn't become any hotter. Brian sighed and threw away the rest of his ciggy. Alright. I'll leave the option to you since you look a bit tense. My place or your place? You chose to trust him. Your place. After all, Wasn't that your offer? He smirked. Okay, I got you. He then pressed the on button and nothing. Did his car brake? But then you watched as his hand moved down to the stick. Wait, is this an electric car? He snorted. To answer you, he simply started driving. Your eyes widened. How? This car must cost a fortune. Who is your dad? He shrugged. Short answer or long answer? Short. He laughed. And this was why he liked you. Well, the short answer is Daddy is a big fish at F Robotics. Because of my laziness, I'm the black sheep of the family. Got kicked out. And because they still love me, or at least they claim to do, Mother gives me big presents like the car and my apartment in the hopes to convince me to come back. Not realizing that I want emotionally available parents rather than parents who show their love through money they spent. You snorted. Let me guess. The main argument is, you don't have to pay rent. You can give us something back. Oh boy. Do you have parents like me as well? You shrugged. Yeah. That's why I want to pay as much of my tuition as possible to take away an argument they can throw at me, but clearly they aren't as rich as you are. Brian looked at you for a moment, and then smiled. Smart girl. You shuddered. I'm not smart. An excuse or genuine belief? You blinked. I don't know anymore. The facts would say that I am, but I keep failing at everything that I try. Relationships, high school, I don't even know how I got into university. And even that I'm about to fail. After his hand returned to the wheel, he smiled at you. Brian pulled up his thumb and chewed on it in thought. After his hand returned to the wheel, he smiled at you. Well, don't worry about failing, because now you got Uncle Brian to help you out. You snorted. You aren't that much older than me. I'm 25. See? Just a difference of only like 5 years. He shrugged, but didn't comment, thankfully. So, outside of literature, what do you actually study? Literature, programming, and a little bit of art. He furrowed his brows and grinned. Can I make a liberal arts student joke? And then another? And if it's still funny, another? Oh, would that be offensive to you? Because then I would make even more. No, it was you who snorted. I mean, is my hair pink? It's not. Yes, so you can make jokes without me getting offended. The rest of the drive the two of you spent making terrible, offensive jokes at each other. And by the time you both were just quoting 4chan and Twitter posts both of you had picked up over the years, you realized maybe it had gone a little too far. Soon the two of you arrived at a big apartment complex. Something you did expect, but not as luxurious as it actually was. You and Brian left the car behind in the building's underground car park. So, how expensive is this? He shrugged. I don't know. Mom pays for it. Then he thought for a moment. Let me think. That makes about 150k a month. Probably more. Mom's close behind as a secretary. So I guess it's pretty expensive. Holy shit, you're rich! What the fuck? He took a step back at your outburst. I mean, I told you. Did you not listen? Brian shrugged. But why would you throw this life away, working as a goddamn security guard? The man looked at you, a bit of disappointment in his face, like you just asked an obvious question. But without saying another word, you just followed him to the elevator. He selected a button somewhere in the middle, and then you ascended. We are here to deal with your learning issue. Do we really have to talk about family? Brian sounded dejected. You furrowed your brows. Was this the reason he seemed to live in the pizzaplex? To escape this? As you left the elevator and entered the apartment, you were blown away. It was a simple studio apartment. At least on paper. It was incredibly beautiful. The right half of the room was dedicated to a large queen-sized bed. Posters of various metal bands were plastered behind it. A black wooden sunscreen that stood in the middle of the room separated the two halves. The other half was a very minimalistic styled living room / kitchen, with a TV, a grey sofa, and a table with a computer on it. The floor was made out of marble. The walls were a bit dirty, but clearly supposed to be white. And there were a few full black garbage bags in the living room half. Clearly, Brian had tried to clean this place as well as he could for your arrival. Huh. Cleaning this took me the entire night, so you better appreciate it. You looked at him. You're going all the way for this, huh? He smiled. And why shouldn't I? I don't have many friends outside of the internet, I mean. And I don't feel the need to keep it clean all the time. I'm way too lazy for that. You sat down on the sofa and set up your bag. Well, how do you intend to help me? This is some next level shit. I'm a philosophy major. There's nothing I can't handle. Slowly you turned your head towards him. He was sitting on the chair in front of his computer. Why else do you think I love my job so much? Proudly he scratched his chin. What? Didn't expect me to be a thinker? You shrugged. I mean, at least 60% of the stuff that I've seen and heard in the last hour I didn't expect. But I still don't get it. Why do you work at the pizzaplex? Think about it. Philosophy majors have 4 outcomes in their lives. It's self-deletion, becoming an internet blogger who gets cancelled by entitled arts majors, turning politician and hoping your ideals survive the insanity of their rivals, and, well, working at a low-paying job and realize how good this actually feels. You looked at him in surprise, but couldn't suppress a yawn. I guess you want to take your nap first. You nodded. He helped you on your feet and guided you to his bed. Well, good night. You grabbed his arm, interrupting him. Didn't you say you spent the entire night cleaning? You smiled, and he nodded. So you must be tired too, huh? Brian's mouth twitched into a grin, and he didn't fight you when you pulled him to his bed. You sat down opposite to him. I'm not going to, take my clothes off, you said, blushing. And defensively he raised a hand, jokingly said, Wouldn't even dream of it. A simple, was your deadpan response. Your heartbeat increased as you lied down next to him. One of his hands under his head, he stared, tired, at the ceiling. Was it awkward? Sure. But at the same time, it felt nice. After a minute of silence between the two of you, however, you gave in to your childish urges. Awkwardly, you huddled closer to him and placed an arm on his chest. Thankfully, Brian didn't say anything or pushed you away. Brian just smiled and yawned. You know, you said eventually, when you offered a cram session, this is not what I expected. He humphed. What were you expecting? Something like this. You rolled on your side and gently shoved an arm under his body, pulling him closer to you. For a moment you looked into each other's eyes, and then you gently kissed his lips. Of course, a guy like Brian wouldn't object to this. But you were also surprised he made no motion to pull you closer. So that's the type of guy he was, you thought. Your lips curled up into a smile, and you took his hand, dragging him on top of you. And then you separated. Brian was breathing heavily, his eyes half-lidded, mouth curled up into a horny grin. And I thought you were tired. And the only thing you could think of as a reply was a smug, "Yeah, but who said anything about going to sleep just yet?"